cellular connectivity is really practical for connecting your IoT devices, especially when you're out in the wild, right? But it's never really easy to configure it exactly the way you want. Here comes a network as a service solution called Stacuity. Mike is here on the IoT Show to tell us everything about it and how you, IoT developer, can make the most of cellular connectivity for your IoT devices. Hi everyone, this is the IoT Show. I'm Olivier, your host. Today we have Mike joining us to discuss Stacuity. Hey Mike, how are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Good.
Well, it's good to have you. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from a little place called the Isle of Man, which is a little rock in the middle of the Irish Sea between England and Ireland. So
Um,
80,000 of us live on this particular rock, so and I'm one of them.
yeah, but as we can see, you are connected. You're not separated from the rest of the world. You can work remotely. You can work with people around the world.
We're a very digital jurisdiction. So I mean, we've got lots of freedom here, and digital technologies are one of the really high stakes up on our economic contributors. So yeah, it's a great place to run a digital business from.
That's awesome. But we're making the assumption that connectivity is a given, that we can connect everywhere. In the world of IoT, we're evolving. Not that much, but having devices connected is key, especially devices that are roaming, moving around, are in a remote location, don't have wired internet access. You have a need to connect them. And so tell us about Stacuity. Let's talk about the inception of Stacuity. And I think it relates to the fact that you are in an island like that as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I was saying before, the Isle of Man's actually, we have to be an innovative place. The businesses here have to be innovative. And so, for example, Manx Telecom, which is the local mobile operator here, has always been very ambitious. But once the local market here gets saturated, once each of those 80,000 people has a phone, what do you do to grow? In order to grow, you have to be able to export, really. And so, in order to export, you need to be able to, as an operator, open up your network so it can be used for other purposes beyond the shores of this island. So, yeah, the fact that I'm living on the Isle of Man and Manx Telecom had that ambition is quite fundamental to the journey that we're now on.
Yep, definitely. So when looking at your website and when we discussed, this IoT show and prepared for that and looked at how we're going to present things and so on, there's this notion of network as a service that popped up. And
Mm.
to me, it was like, oh, interesting. Network as a service. We'll talk about like platform as a service, IoT device as a service, network as a service. So tell me a bit about what this concept is about and how does it match your customers and types of customers' needs and requirements?
Yeah, well, if you think about the cellular networks of the world, they're originally conceived to pop in your phone so you can call your mom or you can send a message to your friends. It was really designed for person-to-person communication initially at its foundation, but it's now become sort of the fabric of society. It underpins so many different applications, and what's currently known as IoT is one of those. Connecting things which aren't used by a person. It's effectively an enterprise-style application, and our really view is now that the way that the world has developed. Um, Operators and companies who are using SIM cards and devices, they have to be able to manage those devices in terms of security, performance, behavior, in the same way as they're used to managing, the laptops and the PCs and things previously in their office. So the network as a service model really allows them control over the behavior of all those globally distributed assets, whether it's a SIM card in a laptop or a SIM card on a lamppost or a SIM card in a scooter in a city centre, as if they were actually connected to their own network. So if you've
Mhm.
got a scooter in the middle, in the middle of a city, it's going to be connected to the mobile operator's network. It's not normally a network owned by the enterprise. So the network as a service model means that the scooter operator can still have the same control. They can see where that scooter is. They can control it. They can do troubleshooting. They can, do technical things like control which IP address it goes and where the data from that scooter is sent to. Um, Capabilities which previously were locked away in a dark room at the back of the mobile operator's engineering department. Network as a
Mhm.
service is about surfacing those and delegating and democratizing that control to the actual customers.
Okay, and that's at the core of what Stacuity is, right?
Yeah, security is like the world's democratized mobile network. It's as if everyone can have their own mobile network globally, as if it was their own. They control it in the way that they want to control it. So the model is really similar to what the hyperscalers have done for infrastructure.
Hmm.
So if you are let's say you're a customer of AWS, um, other cloud providers are available, obviously. You log on to their portal at 2 o'clock in the morning, halfway through your pizza. You can spin up a slice of the infrastructure as if it was your own. You can control it and configure it, and you can pay for it on a consumption basis. So what the model we're trying to do in security is take that same approach to connectivity. Because historically, if you turn to a mobile operator and ask them to tailor or configure the network to meet your purposes, it'll cost tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, take weeks, if not months.
Yeah.
So we're trying to bring those two worlds together. Everything self-service, democratized, consumption-based, micro-segmented, if you like, on the connectivity side. That's what
Yeah.
Stacuity is about.
Yeah, if you like network provider these days, if you ask them to change something, it doesn't fit the scenarios that is the main ones they're making money off, which is telcos for consumers.
Mm.
They will definitely give you a hard time on this customization. Was using your services these days? Is it device manufacturers? Is it operators? Is it solution providers? What kind of customers do you have?
Well, we have three. It's probably worth talking about our channels, our three routes to market,
Okay.
really. So, route to market number one is those mobile operators themselves. Um, and mobile operators aren't particularly good at being agile. They've been seen as providing a bit of a dumb pipe. All they do is packets in, packets out, and they charge for that. So, but they're getting more and more demanding requirements from customers. So, in order to remain relevant and to sort of preserve their slice of the margins in the value chain. They want value added capabilities. They want to enhance their platforms, um, but they're not well positioned to do it. So our proposition to the mobile operators is, take the security core as a service or network as a service, brand it up with your brand, use that to approach new channels. You'll still make all the same, connectivity revenues and margins that they rely on, that they've done previously. Um, but they'll play much more nicely with those customers. They can be a lot more responsive. They can be a lot quicker. Lots of the configuration changes, which are very costly for the operators to do historically, the customers can do themselves. So they don't lose anything. They still make the money where they made the money previously, but they had much more happier customers. So that's channel number one. Um,
Mhm.
Channel number two are what's called MVNOs or aggregators. So these are organizations which buy connectivity from an operator and sell it into a particular market, either with a different commercial wrap or tailoring on a particular vertical. But historically, what they buy from their operators is very vanilla, is very standard. It's very difficult to really to have for those businesses to have differentiators. So they've been limited to competing on price. They win business by being the cheapest. Margins are squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. And so there's lots of consolidation in that market. Now, our pitch to those guys is if you're going to survive that consolidation or come out of that consolidation floating on the top, not sinking to the bottom, you need some value added services, you need capabilities. So, security gives you a way to add those additional features to their proposition without it being a big technical headache, without there being lots of investment. It's very straightforward. And third, our third channel are to actually IoT verticals and end users, if you like. So if you're an automotive company or a provider of payment terminals or wearables or connected health applications, um, in each of those verticals, there are capabilities which we have which enhance those propositions, making it more reliable, making it faster, a better service, quicker route to market. So in that situation, we effectively are an MVNO or an aggregator in our own rights. And we have a number of partner operators integrated into our network already,
Mhm.
whose roaming footprints we use. So you buy, 1,000 SIMs from us to go in your payment terminals. They'll work anywhere in the world because we're leveraging the roaming footprints of our partners. So
Okay.
long-winded answer, but hopefully it answers the question.
It is perfect. Actually, definitely sets the stage and really describes the offer and how the IoT part of it, is relevant to our audience here. And actually, that leads to another question. Talking about the fact that cellular network is very sophisticated and it's not just a dumb pipe, and that the notion of network as a service is about offering customization levels. Can you give us some concrete examples for IoT players like the one you were mentioning, automotive manufacturer, payment terminals operators, and things like that? What are the kind of configuration they should be expecting to be able to do that really make a difference for them compared to other offerings out there?
Yeah, well, I think the industry's got a bit, those sort of buyers have become conditioned to the idea that a SIM card just puts their device on the internet. This is a good
Mhm.
example. You put the SIM card in, you get on the internet, but there's lots of risks with that from a security perspective, guaranteed quality of service. There's lots of complexity required at each end in terms of VPNs and security, etc. So one thing that you could do with our platform is you can say, right, those 1,000 SIM cards, all the traffic that's generated, all the data generated from those SIM cards, we want to end up in our Amazon AWS cloud network here without touching the internet. So we want the services at the back end to see these devices as if they were directly connected. So it doesn't need to go anywhere near the internet. And then if one of those devices is not operating as expected, or they need some troubleshooting, and they want to do like a packet trace or any diagnostics, they want to be able to click a button and do that in real time. They don't want to raise a ticket with their mobile operator only to be told, okay, yeah, Frank will do that trace for you next Thursday at 3 o'clock. You need it there and now. So troubleshooting, control, end-to-end security, those are the sort of capabilities which are increasingly important as IoT matures and
Yeah.
increasingly difficult for standard operators to provide.
Yeah. So there are some what we call private 5G offerings out there. The big hyperscalers like Microsoft do have their private 5G offerings. How would you say Stacuity, compares or fares against these other ones?
Well, private networks are a bit of a hybrid term, really, because private networks, if you start when you say private 5G, you're normally referring to a private radio access network.
Yes.
So private RAN, where you're actually running the infrastructure of the network yourselves. And there are many use cases where that's important. There's many use cases where if it's very high throughput or very cost sensitive or very security critical, there are cases where that's the only solution. But quite often those 5G, those private network projects are undertaken really because the customer wants visibility and control over those devices. They want to be able to dictate where the data goes. They want to be able to turn SIMs on and off, issue SIMs themselves. They want to constrain that those SIMs can only work in a particular area or a particular region. And the reality is, using a service like ours, you can get lots of those benefits without actually having to deploy a private network. You're effectively carving
Mhm.
out a private island on the macro network for your purposes. So there's lots of use cases where that is actually a better solution than actually deploying lots of radios and antennas and having to maintain and manage that estate of infrastructure, which is costly.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, so if I were to try and position Stacuity in that huge pond of IoT or devices connectivity, domains of like private 5G, that means you own your own infrastructure and you have to deploy your own base stations and all shebang, right? So you have fine control per
Mhm.
se, but that's it's not the same expense at the beginning and same operation cost. At the opposite, you have the Tails Amnify Onomondo that offer a hey, here is a SIM card, and we'll use whatever existing available network that the operators locally will provide, and we negotiate for you, and you don't have to care about it. And is it fair to say that Stacuity will actually be in that middle? That is like, hey, you get the best of both worlds, basically.
Well, there are some similarities. I mean, those sort of businesses have done really well in order to really get traction in IoT and to really get volumes going. Our commercial model is similar in that, those guys are using the roaming footprint of partners to give them coverage in exactly the same way as we do.
Hmm.
The difference with us is we've, rather than take a traditional mobile core network and wrap it up, we've actually built it from scratch, which means it's been a long journey, but it means every layer has been particularly tailored with remembering that the customer here is a developer, the customer here is an enterprise. It's not a
Hmm.
consumer proposition that's somehow been wrapped up and adapted. So we've got the same coverage, and we take the same approach to coverage. It is through roaming primarily at the moment. Although we are now starting to integrate directly into in-country operators, there's an
Mhm.
increasing number of countries where permanent roaming is becoming an issue, and therefore they really want SIM cards for these applications that are used in the country to be issued by operators in those countries. So in those situations, we're now moving on from roaming and integrating directly into those countries. But the big difference is, as I say, about how the core network is architectured. Ours has been relentlessly built trying to democratize control from the outset rather than trying to wrestle control away from an operator's core network.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I like to say there's room for everyone, and each of these offers do match needs and requirements for like customers that are different from one another. So we definitely are bringing that level of these knobs that many others don't provide or make it too expensive or too complicated. I totally appreciate that.
Oh,
So,
look,
Mike,
just
go
before
ahead,
we
go
move
ahead.
on to that one important thing to bear in mind is we're actually working with some of those guys now because those existing IoT resellers, aggregators who have been built on top of a traditional core, have come to the realization that if we deploy our core there with all these added capabilities, we're not really competing. We're quite complementary. So I think those sort of existing vendors are also moving on and also realizing the need to give much more fine-grained control to customers, and we're helping them with that.
Fantastic. If someone wants to learn more and practically speaking wants to try out your offerings, what do you recommend to do?
Well, I mean, if you're a curious developer or engineer, just like me, and you want to get your hands on a sim, the easiest way is just to go to Amazon and buy one. So if you go to Amazon and search for Stacuity, you can order SIM cards. They'll arrive in the post. Shortly, there'll be an eSIM proposition to go alongside that as the current standards are ratified. The moment a plastic SIM's the easiest way to get started. It will
Mhm.
arrive in the post with a QR code on it. You scan that on the camera on your phone or on your PC, and you'll get straight into our portal. And within 5 minutes, you can have your own global mobile network up and running and start routing traffic and digging in and experimenting with what we've got. So
Yeah.
if you're a developer, that's the best place to start. But it is addictive. So those first 5 minutes can very quickly turn into 5 hours.
Yeah. And I suppose you can do that from anywhere in the world, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Anywhere, there's not a country that I know of, maybe outside North Korea, where we don't have coverage. So anywhere where any of our roaming partners have coverage, or any of our sponsor operators have coverage, our SIM cards will work.
Awesome. And one thing we didn't mention, but I think it's worth like as a closing point, not as a closing point, but to mention at some point here is the fact that not only do you have control over the configuration of the network and the logs and so on, but you also have control of the price, right? Because connectivity has a cost. So that means that if you control how the network is configured and how it's used, you have a better control over how much it's going to cost you, when you deploy your IoT infrastructure, especially at scale, because we're talking about IoT scale, right?
Yeah, well, there's two layers to that. As an end user, as a customer of the SIM cards, you can set, spending thresholds. You can control which networks your devices can and can't attach to avoid networks which are particularly costly. You can obviously set warnings and credit limits to track that. At the layer above, if you use our platform as a reseller or as an operator, you can also define that pricing yourself as well. So you can create bundles and packages to define, which suit the use cases of your customers. Effectively, you have your own billing system built into the platform.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Mike, thanks a lot for all these insights. We'll put the link to that getting started experience that, you have documented that. You just describe rapidly, get the SIM and so on, but then there's a few steps you can go through. The portal is pretty, self-explanatory, but, going through that link down there will be useful. And eventually I'm going to put the Amazon link as
Yeah,
well, right? Why not? A little affiliate link here. Perfect.
yeah, yeah, perfect. Yeah, excellent.
Awesome.
Right,
Well,
thank you,
Mike,
Oliver.
yeah, thanks for your time. Have a great one. Everyone, thanks for tuning in and talk to you soon.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.